Good evening. Thank you very much for coming to this RRI Revolution Industrial IoT Initiative Symposium. This is day 3. The topic is data exchange and data quality, new trend. I'd like to briefly explain in today's session, together with the development of the ICT and also the progress of the digitization, we are seeing the tremendous increase of the data volume. And we will today focus on the manufacturing sector and how they can utilize data. And this has become a very major topic these days. Concerning this topic, we have 5 speakers. And we would like to proceed with the presentation and panel discussion. So first of all, I will be acting as a moderator. My name is Kei Fujinami, Senior Consultant at Nomura Research Institute. At the beginning, I'd like to briefly introduce the speakers. First, from Europe, GAIA-X AISBL board member. We have Mr. Hubert Tardieu. Next, from Tokyo University, the Professor of Informatics Studies, Dr. Noboru Koshizuka, is also the President of DSA. And also, Evangelist of the Telecommunication, we have Mr. Sakaino from NTT Communications. From the panel discussion, from MHI, we have Mr. Sonoda, and we also have Mr. Hiramoto from the Digital Agency of Japan. So first, before we start the session, I'd like to make one request to you. Later on, during the panel discussion, to the panelists and to the speakers, if you have any questions to them, you see a link to the YouTube, and you'll be able to open the site called Slido. This is a Q&A site. You can enter your questions, and please make sure to enter your name and affiliation and to whom you want to ask the questions, so that we can take your questions and ask them to the panelists. Without further ado, we'd like to now start the first presentation. The first presentation is about the data ecosystem and GAIA-X vision. We have Mr. Tardieu to speak to you. Mr. Tardieu, please.
Thank you, dear Kai-san. I'm happy to speak to you from Paris, and I would like to present to you what we have been doing now since 2 years with the GAIA-X project. If I can have my first slide, please. Okay, so I am Hubert Tardieu. I was the chairman of the GAIA-X Association Board of Directors until last June, and I am now independent board member of GAIA-X. Next, please. Next slide, please. So my presentation will be in 20 minutes to give you quickly the GAIA-X vision, to show how we see data sharing in the business world. I wish to give you 2 real-life examples, Skywise, which exists now since 5 years in the aircraft industry, and Catena-X in the automotive industry. Then I want to give you some hints about the way economists are looking at data exchange in the business world. I will rely for that on the cooperation we have for some time with the University of Toulouse. Then showing what are the requirements for industrial data exchange and incentive, discuss quickly the regulation in preparation in Europe, And finally, I'm happy to say that we have now engaged a discussion with DataX and DSA regarding DataX GAIA-X cooperation, and I will show you a little bit about the memo of understanding which is in preparation. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, so to go very quickly, we have been working on GAIA-X since now about 1.5 years. It has been announced on the 4th of June 2021 that 22 founding members from Germany, 11 from Germany, 11 for France, will be creating the GAIA-X Association. We have been working over the summer of 2020 on what are the technical basis for this GAIA-X Association. And from now on, we are in full cruising speed, as you can see on the chart, addressing two complementary aspects. On the top of the X, the data space creation, and on the bottom, the cloud infrastructure to facilitate exchange in the business. Obviously, manufacturing is one key element of this approach. Next slide, please. Okay, a quick reminder, and I know that has been presented last year by Professor Boris Otto in the similar conference. What is in our mind a data space? In that scheme, you see on the top the real world of mobility ecosystem with people, with cars, with trams, with bus, and on the bottom, you have what is a federated infrastructure in terms of technicalities, and in the middle, you have what we call the data space, in that case, mobility, which is a shared digital twin of the real world, which is shared between the various partners of the ecosystem. In GAIA-X, the two key elements of data sharing is that we do not require that data be on the same physical data lake. We leave the data where it is, and we do not require that a common data model be established, forcing everyone to have the same definition for data. It means that the integration will be done primarily through semantic level, through ontology and vocabularies. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just to give you a hint about the fact that on August 21, GAIA-X has published a significant document, which is a description of all the vertical on which we have been working. It is a document about 200 pages, and probably most relevant to this conference are the position paper on Industry 4.0 and the position paper on mobility. What is important is that this document is giving you the 4 years plan, how we intend to establish first use cases, then business cases, and then lighthouse ecosystem. Next, please. Okay, I would like to start with two significant examples. I'll be quickly on both of them. The first one is Skywise. Skywise is a platform which has been created about 4 years ago by Airbus, and which is now already regrouping 130 airlines company. These companies are sharing data about their operation, while Airbus is sharing data about the production of the aircraft they have bought. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, these are the main shared value across the aviation ecosystem. You can see the various partners of the ecosystem, Airbus itself, the airlines, the airports, passengers, all that has been taken into account in the way to show how the value of Skywise has been created. Next, please. Okay, typically a few of the main use cases which are important to mention. Maybe one of the most significant is aircraft deferred defect. Basically, when a default is found on an aircraft, it's important to know whether other aircraft which have been created in the same batch are meeting the same kind of difficulties, and if this is the case, to apply to the aircraft where you detect the default, the same remedy that has been done on the others. But you see all the various values. Airbus is claiming that thanks to this Skywise platform, they are saving 30% of the cost of operation on their plane. That benefits being shared between Airbus and the airlines company. Next, please. Okay, so you see here the main figures, and what is important is to see all the airlines, and I see two Japanese airlines, ANA and Japan Airlines, which are part of this ecosystem. Next, please. Okay, let me go now to another very important platform. While Skywise is existing for almost 4 years, Catena-X is in preparation. You see, it is working on the data-driven value chain in the automotive industry. As you know, in the automotive industry, 30% of the value is created by the automotive manufacturer, while 70% is created by the part manufacturer. And therefore, creating a common data space between all these partners is essential. Next, please. So you see here all the partners. You see most of the main equipment manufacturer and automotive manufacturer in Germany. Next, please. So this is a vision and the guiding principle. So it's important to say that the Catena-X has decided to use the GAIA-X principle in order to establish their platform. Today, the Catena-X is receiving 200 million euro of the German government to launch this platform. Next, please. Okay, so this is a traditional way how to create a platform. You build first initial use cases, you develop the technology and the network. This is what we are doing jointly with Catena-X. And we are now approaching the time where transfer and scale out will take place with an operating platform which will have to be created. Next, please. Okay, these are the 10 use cases as a starting point. Let me simply mention the one on sustainability because it has already been prototyped by an application developed by NTT, which had been presented at the last Hanover Fair, which was how to regroup the CO2 emission when a product has been created through 3 different countries, Switzerland, Germany, and Japan. Next, please. Okay, let's keep that one. It shows you the various steps for getting there. Next, please. Okay, let me go now to what is really the topic of this panel. How do you create value while sharing data in the business world? So the basis of the reasoning is that our industry is fragmented in value chain where every player is specialized in the production of goods or services which overall optimize the production process. You need to remind Skywise, Airbus is producing the aircraft, EasyJet, Japan Airlines are operating them, maintaining them, and at every stage of the value chain, there is competition which is preventing sharing of data. The work which we have done in GAIA-X with the Toulouse School of Economy has shown to us that we can demonstrate that in a world where a lot of externality exists, and I will go quickly to explain externality to say this is an advantage you have which is not reflected in the cost of transaction. So if you are able to show those externality, it's important to say that sharing data is the best way to optimize the overall economic operations, okay? I don't want to get into detail. That has been demonstrated some time ago by a very famous economist called Coase. Next, please. Okay, this is simply to show you how the value is created in the business-to-business world. So again, thanks to Skywise, Airbus is producing the production data. EasyJet or Japan Airlines are producing usage and context data. They also produce the consumer experience data, but only by regrouping their force, they can create an orchestrated ecosystem platform, which itself is able to deliver services which are at the basis of the monetization of the sharing of data. So this is something which is completely described in the book I have mentioned before, Deliberately Digital, which we have published with some colleagues 18 months ago. Next, please. Okay, so what are the requirements for data exchange and what are the incentives? Let me tell you, there are two cases where data sharing works well. Either you share the same type of data. This is an example of here in Germany, which is regrouping Daimler, BMW, and Volkswagen, sharing all the data collected in the car, whatever be the manufacturer. The objective of that is to get very quickly the description of the landscape around the cars, wherever in Europe you are. That will facilitate autonomous driving in the future. The second type is the sharing of complementary data types, like in Skywise, as I mentioned before. And as I mentioned, building the business case for data sharing means finding out use cases, identifying business cases, and deciding what are the lighthouse ecosystem that we want to promote. This is what we are doing right now in GAIA-X. What is difficult is to measure the progress in terms of data sharing, and during the panel, we can discuss potentially the use of tokenomics, which is the use of in advance advantage we can be found in blockchain. Next, please. At this point of time, the European Commission is busy by putting at the European Parliament free regulation, which will be organizing the data sharing in business, Digital Market Act, Digital Service Act, and Data Governance Act. I would like to insist in this conference on one specific topic which is involved in the Data Governance Act, which is the importance of regulating the role of what is called the data intermediary for the business platform. The data intermediary is the operating company which is operating the platform. And what the Article 11 of the Data Governance Act is saying, that ecosystem partners cannot be data intermediary, okay? And the challenge is for platform operating companies to realize that. So I can come back into that in the discussion later on. Next, please. Okay, let me say 1 minute about what we are preparing with GAIA-X and the Data Society Alliance. I hope Professor Noboru Koshizuka can also mention that. So we are preparing a memo of understanding with the idea that to help the penetration of GAIA-X in Japan, but also to help the penetration of Data-X in Europe. We have very similar objective, and we believe it will be mutual benefits. Next, please. Okay, let me finish this presentation by saying that in GAIA-X, we see the next 10 years a little bit like what we have seen in the 80s. You may remember in the 80s, we have the telecom operators and equipment manufacturers who have invented the Internet protocol, which was a new way to transfer data through packets. And at the end of the 80s, Tim Berners-Lee invented the web. The message is very simple. It would not be useful to have IP if it was not to be used by the web, but the web would not have existed if the IP was not operational in the infrastructure. We believe very interesting similarities could be seen. It is important that we establish the basis of an open, interoperable, and portable infrastructure in cloud, but this is only useful if it is to be used within the data space as it has been defined in industrial, automotive, and therefore we need the infrastructure for making the data space working, but the infrastructure without the data space is of no use. This is really, we believe, the main challenge of the next 10 years, and this is something which is in Europe now fully understood, and we believe data sharing and preparing the cloud infrastructure are the same, the two facets of the same coin. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to invite the second speaker. The title of the presentation is Data-EX Cross-Domain Data Exchange Platform. From Tokyo University, we have Dr. Koshizuka. Dr. Koshizuka, please. Yes, thank you for the introduction. I am Koshizuka from Tokyo University as well as from DSA. Should I share my slides or would you do it for me? Thank you. So today I'd like to talk about Data-EX Cross-Domain Data Exchange Platform. Earlier, the GAIA-X was introduced, and in Japan, we are promoting Data-EX. So I'd like to talk about that. Next slide. For Japanese people, I think it's already something that you already know, but in Japan, about the future digitalized society, this is a vision that we have. So in the past 10 years or so, we have been talking about Society 5.0. So 5.0, or at the time of 1.0 was hunting and gathering, and we went through the industrial era, and then we went to the information cyberspace and cyber physical and digital twin, real and virtual being merged. So digital world is being created, And that is what we expect in Society 5.0. So in that sense, so what is the difference between 4.0 and 5.0? Now, cyber world in 4.0, for example, the internet, free, but without any disciplines, everything were done without any disciplines. So this was the disadvantages. But in the 5.0, in addition to the cyber world, also the physical world will be added or combined. And more recently, trust and the distribution of the well-structured data and the trustworthiness, those will become more important. So in order to connect with the real world, the rules that we have and norms and trust that we have in the real world or privacy matter, all of those have to be realized in the cyberspace as well. So merging cyber and physical in an appropriate way must be done, and Data EX and probably GAIA-X of EU is the platform trying to realize this, or infrastructure. So that is what we are trying to build, and that is what we are trying to do. Next slide. So in Society 5.0, data, as it is said, is the new oil of the 21st century. It's very important. So in order for the whole society to move, I think the data is very important. And also ICT, if you look at the trends of the ICT, hardware, software, those are not the areas of the competition, but rather data layer is going to be the most important competitive area among all the ICT. So data is the new oil, and also that is where we have a competition, and data is becoming very important in our society. So in Japan, about the data distribution and the sharing or exchange of the data, we have had a vision of a DFFT, that is the data free flow with trust. As I said, we call this a trust or a kind of a norm. We have to make sure that there is a reliability, and also the borderless, or there has to be a free flow of data. And that is important in the world. So we have to make sure that we have both the freedom and also the norm. So it's not just going to be a concept. In order to realize this, we need the infrastructure, we need a platform, and also we need a system to operate that. And by building that quickly, based on the DFFT, we want to distribute the data internationally. With that very strong determination, we are promoting this vision. So when we say data platform, there are different functions. What we are trying to do at the Data EX is something that I'd like to talk about. There are three major ones. First is searching for data. This is a very basic function. So searched data needs to be acquired. So when you can acquire data, the trust becomes important. So the appropriate person acquiring the appropriate data is important. And then it's not just acquiring the data, but we want to connect the acquired data. You want to make it possible so that you can use data. And for that, the standardization of the technology, standardization of the system, and based on the standards, we need to create data. And Mr. Hiramoto, later on, from the data agency, will probably talk about this. So as a nation, we can create this acquired data. So search, acquire, and connect. Those are three core functions that we are promoting. When we say data, for example, the platform for use or AI or analysis, those are also other functions. But at data EX, exchanging and sharing, those are not the functions that we are working on. And they are done by different parties. Next slide. Now, in the case of Japan, probably it's quite different from Europe, but there are different areas, and data platform actually already exists in Japan. So, of course, open data in Europe and America and also different countries have the open data platform. And the local government also have an organization for the open data. Also the personal data information bank exists, and also the public transformation platform also exists, and IVI, which connects the plants, or weather information platform and academic data platform, AI data platform, space data, agricultural and geography data platform. All of those siloed platforms exist. We often say that the siloed structure is not good, but if you look at different areas or sectors, we already have those platforms established. So when you look at Japan as a whole and to connect Japan to the world, to create a platform or data space, instead of doing it from the scratch, we can take advantage of some of those platforms and federate them. I think that way of thinking is important. So those people who have data, of course, federation is important from the sovereignty perspective, and to do so in a short term is also important. So federation becomes important. So, and for the international alliance, we need also to think about the federation, for example, from Europe, US, or other Asian countries. We need to work on this. Now, in order to realize that, data EX is the concept or vision that we have, and that is something that we are trying to build. So DSA, Data Society Alliance, is an organization that we created. 140 members are actually working at DSA. This is an organization. I myself am a chairman of DSA. Okui-san, Mano-san, they are directors, and from the representative companies of Japan, they are advisors. So advisors, they actually lead, or they are the leaders of this area who joined us as advisors. Next, again, from the major companies in Japan, we have directors joining us. So this is really all Japan team to create the platform. So that's what we are doing right now. So members, I mentioned 140, I think. That's my recollection. But those are the, this is a list of the companies. Next page. So in addition to the companies, local government, there are more than 1,000 local governments, and local governments are also working with us. And for the global and international cooperation, this is extremely important. So in the world of cyber, internet connects countries, and the data will be distributed and information will be distributed. And by doing so, various values can be generated. So that's what has been happening. So when we talk about the data infrastructure, I don't want to build the Japanese data infrastructure. Of course, Data EX is a Japanese organization, but it should not be closed to Japan. Oh, the size of Japan in the world is not so big. And 7 billion, or it's only 100 million people out of 7 million or 9 billion people in the world. So I think it's very important to be focused on the cooperation globally. So today GAIA-X was introduced, and it was also mentioned that the GAIA-X and DSA alliance. So in Japan, I already talked about the fact that we have several platforms, and also the FiWare, IDS, X-Road, and for personal data, My Data, and so forth. In Asia, there is a India Stack, and also China, US has their different organizations. So working with those, I think, is important. So those activities is something that we have started at DSA. So focusing on Europe, I'd like to give you some examples. Last year, we have reached an agreement with FiWare, and the DTA, which was a former DSA, we had this corporate agreement that was in February last year. And the other day, very recently, IDSA and DSA, in October, we have signed a collaboration agreement. And as Mr. Tardieu mentioned, DSA and GAIA-X, in a similar way, we have an agreement. So we have started the formal activities based on the corporate agreement. So between Japan and Europe, we want to make sure there is no border. So we would like to make sure there's a good distribution of data and access to information that would benefit the private sector in Japan as well as in Europe. And I think it's important for us to build such infrastructure to enable that. So Data EX, I showed you the organization structure. Let me talk about the content. First is a vision and mission. First, this is a vision. We want the world of data-driven innovation. So from now on, in the private sector or in cities and in the society as a whole, when we try to generate innovation, data is indispensable. So by using data, we can do various innovation and R&D. Collecting data, acquiring data, searching data, if it becomes expensive to do so, then only the major companies will be able to get the data, and innovation will be very limited. So that has to be avoided. Anyone, startups, small companies. In Japan, there are many medium, small-sized companies. So even the startups, for them to generate innovation, we have to have a good distribution of data. And by doing so, in Japan, anyone will be able to innovate. And that kind of environment is what we would like to create. And this would lead to the competitiveness and the basic strength of the industry in Japan. So we want to make sure that we have an infrastructure to guarantee the data distribution. So that's our vision. And this is our mission. And so anyone being able to do the innovation, this is what we call democracy of innovation. And we want to establish the data-driven society with democracy of innovation. That's our first mission. And I talked about the importance of the international cooperation. So this has to be for the world. We have to develop the data distribution infrastructure open to the world, and providing systems, creating infrastructure, in addition to the principles and rules, the actual transfer of data, the data distribution require technology and service. So we would do so. In addition to our organization, we would work with the government for the development of technology, and by using that, we want to build the infrastructure. Last is being open to the world, so collaboration and contribution to the world. Open to the world and contributing to the world is something that we would like to achieve. That is our mission. So how I talked about society where innovations can be generated. So what kind of society are we trying to realize? So first, democratizing innovation by using data. This is something that I talked about, and that's the first point. And when we try to create a society, in addition to the economy, the environment is also important. In the data society, one of the concepts that we have to realize is economy and also the well-being or happiness of people. I think that is also an essential concept. And the third is ethics. And so sustainability, the environment, zero emission, all of those will be included. So even when it is environmentally friendly, the company might not be able to make profits. And I'm not talking about only making improvements in Japan, but this is a more moral or ethical issue. So economy, well-being, and ethics, all of them have to be realized. And that, I think, is very important vision in the data economy. So this is what we are promoting in Japan, the FFT, which is also important. Having said that, just having the concept, it'll be just the pie in the sky. So we have to have, make this into business. In order to realize vision, we have to be able to establish a data business. And for that, data trading market needs to be established. And that's also something that we would like to do by Data EX. Until now, concerning open data, US, Europe, comparison to them, we were a bit behind. We started late. But we are making steady progress, and Japanese government, also local government are moving toward this, but it's not yet sufficient. So open data is important. So in addition to that, as a public data, the base registry is something that the government is working on. So to make the public data open, and the government utilizing open data is important. As for the personal data, the people in Japan are quite nervous about the privacy, I think. So the government will be working on the secure personal data management. So to realize that, there are several important technologies. First is the federation. So using API, the data platform federation architecture with API integration. And the data platform has to have a perspective of data users. So utilization-oriented data platform is also important. Now, governance of data and the norms of data, the hard laws and soft laws will be formulated and working together with other countries. So regardless of that, we have to make sure that we have a universal platform to enable such governance. So governance neutral architecture is important. So for the federation, we have a module connector being developed. So this is the module structure. So by doing so, sorry, this is only in Japanese, but various data platform and infrastructure can be utilized, and this is what we are currently working on. Different components exist. So this page and the next page, I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. I'd like to skip them. But those are the functions or components necessary for the data platform. So we are developing them. Now, For the Japan's comprehensive national data strategy, Data-EX is mentioned. Sorry, this is a complicated busy slide in Japanese, but this is the data strategy of Japan. It's an overview. And here, there is a mention of the importance of platform. And in order to make the data distribution easy, one of the tools is the Data-EX. And by realizing this, we can distribute data. So that is included in this strategy. So we are working closely with the Japanese government, and they are supporting us. I think that's it. So GAIA-X was introduced. So this is what we are doing in Japan. And we are hoping to work closely together to promote everything. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next up, I'd like to invite Mr. Sakaino from NTT Communications to give us the next presentation. This is titled International Joint Experiment for Secure Data Sharing Among Companies Toward Decarbonized Circular Economy. Thank you. I'm Akira Sakaino from NTT Communications. I am a group leader of RRI Sub-Working Group, a global data management platform. In this sub-working group, we are looking at manufacturing supply chain. We're trying to understand the total CO2 emission and waste generation so that we can disclose that information to investors. That's the use case that we consider. With that, we are trying to identify requirement for international data sharing and also trying to demonstrate based on these use cases on an international level. So today I want to talk about the purpose and outcomes of these activities and explain the overview of the demonstration. Please move on to page 3. As you know, across the world, climate change and marine pollution are two serious problems. Climate-related events and ecosystem destruction impact industries. Under such circumstances, investors focus more on ESG investment, and governments are regulating CO2 emissions and plastic waste. Supply chain players are also asked to take part in decarbonization. So between companies, going forward, information about CO2 emission and waste generation need to be shared and exchanged. So we decided to take EV as an example because it is a challenge of reducing environmental load. It looks at the life cycle CO2 emission and waste generation. And with that use case, we try to identify the requirement for intercompany data exchange. The purpose is to explore information infrastructure to be able to share industry data safely. Based on that specific use case, we would also like to consider the requirement for international data exchange. So we plan to connect with GAIA-X, the US data infrastructure, and try to share information with the foreign companies with common data model and propose OPC UA companion specifications. Participating companies include many, including NTT. Now I want to talk about specific activities. This is the timetable. Since July this year, we are trying to identify rules and functional requirements required for decarbonization and resource circulation related data exchange. By spring next year, we are going to carry out the connection test with GAIA test and also data model for OPC UA. Now I want to explain the process to define the requirements. These are 3 steps to define requirements. Participating companies were asked, we actually conducted a survey to try to understand the challenges facing these companies. so that we can decide on specific use cases. On those use cases, we extract requirements depending on different roles: data provider, data user, and data intermediator. And lastly, we try to identify who should be doing what. Now let me explain the first step. The survey results revealed the current challenges to participating companies, that is to precisely understand the amount of CO2 emission and waste generation. Especially if you look at suppliers and companies, they participate in value chain. The overall value chain, CO2 emission and waste generation is hard to understand. So the problems were actually classified so that we can identify 5 themes to consider. As you can see, these are numbers on the left. The first issue is design of KPIs for decarbonization and resource recycling, and defining data sharing items, format patterns for global standards. Number 3 is the data assurance, including rules, quality, security, and disclosure. And number 4, data infrastructure. 5 is rules for cost sharing. To select use cases, we listened to what participating companies had to say, decided on the use case that involves electric vehicles production, usage, disposal, collection, and reuse and recycle, to try to understand the CO2 emission from each stage. To be able to extract specific challenges, we set scenarios. For example, companies like NTT, in order to meet the demands of shareholders, asked auto OEMs to share CO2 emission to car selling company and disclose that information to shareholders. What data should be collected, from where, in what format, to whom should we disclose? In order for us to exchange data between companies, what rules are required? What security level is required? Who is going to bear the platform building cost? All of these questions were considered. So this is the use case. This shows the movement of goods and data, the flow chart. Material suppliers, component suppliers, auto manufacturers, sales companies, scrap companies, reuse, recycle companies, all of the players is now sharing the CO2 emission information with users through platform. That information will be disclosed through investors. Now I'd like to explain step number 2. Sub-working groups participants are now divided into 3 groups: data providers, data intermediators, and data users. Depending on the role, as I mentioned, there are 5 topics. So depending on the role, we try to list up the concerns and challenges. As a result, we now have 93 specific concerns. For example, there is a fear of data tampering, and there is no cost-sharing mechanism in place, and there is no way to control the scope of disclosure. We classify them into 35 requirements. For example, data authenticity audit that is required. Depending on the nationality of the user, rules of sharing a cost should be established, and the uniform data assurance rules are required. So these are the 35 different requirements. In the interest of time, I won't be able to explain everything, but number 2 is the anonymized data in order to protect personalized data. Number 6 is the recycling process, CO2 emission that should be simulated. Number 10 is about who is going to account for the data that should be traced back to the origin of each piece of data. So in order to meet these requirements, we established specific processes. As you can see, 35 requirements are now summarized into 3 elements. First is international rules for standards and data sharing, and business models, functions and mechanisms of international data sharing infrastructure. Third, C is business models and operational system to encourage data sharing. In order for companies to share data over the national borders, all of these 3 elements need to be considered. All of these 3 aspects need to be improved. To meet these requirements, we try to understand what each player has to do. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have multiple players: government, international organizations, industry organizations, standardization organizations, certification organizations, manufacturers, system integrators, telecommunication carriers, industry equipment manufacturers, platformers, and cloud providers. Circular economy and decarbonization is really the common issue for all of us. In these areas, government need to play important roles. The government must understand the requirements of the citizens and companies and propose the solutions and rules to standardization organizations, and they should establish a legal system and certification organization to comply with the established rules and standards. Industry organizations like RRI must consider the rules and data models necessary for data sharing and propose them to government and standardization. Manufacturers need to collect necessary data and disclose. The system must be established. They have to organize themselves so that they can comply with roles and rules. System integrators need to provide systems and services that are easy to use. More than anything, each player needs to cooperate with each other. That will be the most important piece. Based upon all of these requirements, governments of different countries, companies, and associations need to cooperate. So what are some of the international requirements? For example, A1 here is to define and manage international rules. B1 is data authenticity. B2 is cybersecurity. C1 is fair operational rules for cost sharing. So these requirements, not just in Japan, we are trying to cooperate with European organizations like IDSA, GAIA-X, and SCSN, and Catena-X, so that we can go ahead with the technical validation as well as social implementation. Through these activities, based on specific use cases, we try to consider what are the specific challenges for each player. By doing that, we were able to specify functional requirements, which covers a wide application area that is a very good outcome of our activities. Especially in Japan, manufacturers and system vendors tend to regard themselves as simply providers, but we are trying to incorporate the perspectives of users. Going forward, we would like to expand discussion with data users, for example, automotive manufacturers and user companies. We want to talk to them to understand exactly what data they need. Another challenge is the connection between national data platforms, IDSA, GAIA-X, SCSN, and Catena-X. These are European associations. In Japan, we have DSA. We want to cooperate with all of these associations for mutual connection. Next, I want to talk about the connection test and trial with GAIA-X. This is something that we announced today. NTT Communications announced it. IDSA, Fraunhofer, and TNO and SCSN. And Catena-X, going forward, we want to cooperate with them to go ahead with the demonstration for industrial data exchange. GAIA-X standard technology IDS connector and with Trust, NTT's secure data management technology will be combined together to create test bed so that we can test the connection with SCSN, the European data space, and Japanese companies, equipment and systems. Participating companies include Omron Okuba, Denso Wave, and Yokogawa Electric, and Waseda University. And of course, we want to invite more participants. Furthermore, there are different information models in different countries and industries. In order for having common understanding, we have to have the implementation of semantic data model. So that's something that we want to explore as well. This is an example of use cases in automotive, chemical, food processes. If we want to understand total CO2 emissions, we would like to understand that byproduct. So with that in mind, we want to be connected with not just within Japan, but with EU. Now I want to talk about our initiatives on OPC-UA. In this demonstration, OPC-UA Industry Network International Standard will be utilized for data transmission. In order to understand CO2 emission based on the electricity consumption and fuels consumption of manufacturing process, we are going to set up a data model. This data model was used to send information. When this is practical, we want to propose that as a companion specification to OPC Foundation. Now I want to talk about the future vision of connecting global data platform. We communication company, NTT, has a mission to connect global customers. It's not just Europe, but all the data platforms in different countries need to be mutually connected. So what we want to do is to use our communication infrastructure using a common interface and common data model to share information in the form of software as a service, so that secure data exchange platforms should be available to anybody at low cost and with great convenience. But this cannot be done by us alone. We need to work with communication companies across the world, other industries, IDSA, GAIA-X, and other data exchange technology developers. In that way, by spring next year, we would continue on with this demonstration, and in the first part of next year, we would like to commercially provide the international data exchange platform connecting GAIA-X compliant data space and Japanese industries. Today, I introduced many different initiatives. For decarbonization and circular economy, we want to increase the number of participating companies in the demonstration for international data exchange platform. RRI is promoting this, and NTT that I belong to is also promoting this. We want to increase the number of participating friends. If you are interested in this demonstration, please contact RRI Secretariat or me, Sakaino of NTT Communications. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Sakaino. Now, I'd like to start the panel discussion. Let me share my slide. So in this panel discussion, we would like to talk about 4 topics. And I would like to ask each panelist to answer to those questions. First theme is, what is the purpose of a data exchange? What kind of values are we going to generate? So that's our first question. The second is, in order for the smooth data exchange, data quality is very important and indispensable. So what is data quality? This is the second question that I'd like to ask. The third theme or topic is that manufacturing is a core industry in Japan, and we are focused in the manufacturing. And now we have a various concepts, for example, Industry 4.0. So for the manufacturing industry, what are the challenges for the data exchange and data quality improvement? And lastly, based on all of these, in order to move toward the data exchange, how should the EU and Japan work together or collaborate with each other? So I'd like to have here views from each panelist on those points. So first of all, those are the speakers once again. So Mr. Tardieu, Dr. Koshizuka, and Mr. Sakaino already made presentations, so they introduced themselves. So as panelists, we have Mr. Sonoda from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Mr. Hiramoto, of the head of the data strategy at the digital agency. And I myself, Fujinami, will be the moderator of the panel discussion. So first, I'd like to ask Mr. Sonoda and Mr. Hiramoto to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Sonoda and then Mr. Hiramoto. Thank you. I am Sonoda from Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Thank you very much for inviting me to this distinguished panel. I'd like to briefly introduce myself. More than 30 years ago, I joined Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and until now, I have been working for about 700 products that MHI manufactures. From the ICT perspective, I have been supporting them. In the past 10 years or so, Space Jet, this is an aircraft, to get the approval for the protocol and also the international standardization. That is the area that I have been engaged in. Today, we are going to talk about the data quality and data, and I think that is the area that I'm supposed to talk about. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sonoda. Mr. Hiramoto, please. Thank you very much. I am Hiramoto from the digital agency. The digital agency was established last month in September. It's just a brand new agency. So there, I am in charge of the overall data. So government data and also the foundational data of the society. I'm in charge of the strategy and the quality and how to build a platform. All of those areas are the area of my responsibility. So I look forward to this panel discussion. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get started. So first topic, as you can see on this slide, what is the purpose of data exchange? I'd like to deepen our discussion with you all. So first, in Japan, the manufacturing is a major industry, and there are many efforts being made, but the manufacturing digital transformation is not progressing very quickly. So I'd like to ask Mr. Sonoda this question. So at MHI is one of the major manufacturers in Japan, and I think that you are involved in the data-driven businesses on the daily basis. Mr. Sonoda is also the head of the International Standards Committee of the Engineering Society of Japan. So he's heavily involved in the standardization of the data quality. So based on your experiences, why do you think that the digitization of the Japanese manufacturers are not progressing very quickly? And how can we generate the values through data exchange so that we can make improvements to move forward? And what are the challenges that the Japan should work on from your perspective as a manufacturer? Well, thank you very much. At the beginning, I'd like to just make one excuse. You mentioned that MHI is a representative major company in Japan. It sounds a bit boastful, but we are engaged in the wide-ranging products. And this is just one of the opinions that we can share with you as one of the manufacturers. Now, when you look at the Japanese manufacturers, one thing we have to understand is that from the perspective of data exchange, the shift to the digital economic block and the expansion of it is something that we need to think about. I'm sure you already know this, but right now, it's not just manufacturing, but what we do as a human beings. We are very much dependent on data. So through our daily lives, the ordinary people are living with the data. For example, before you leave for work, you would check on the weather website to decide whether you take an umbrella or not. So it's a very good example that the people use data to make decisions. And also, when you consider the manufacturers, so why are we talking about the digital economic block? I'd like to look back on this. This is my personal view, but one of the change is that from 1990 to 2000, the computing power, or PC, became commoditized. I think that was the major factor. And as a result of this, among businesses, many computers were introduced. And as a result, a huge amount of data started to be generated. So we started to see the information explosion. And when that happened, so there were data in between or among people, and so we cannot really exchange data among people based on scenario, because with the information explosion, one-to-one trade has to shift from the data market, and as an extension of it, there's a digital economic block. So huge amount of data generated by the computers. If the people or the human being try to interpret it, that takes too much time. So in the market trading, interpretation by human being, that function needs to be done by something else. So it goes back to the very fundamental question of what is data. And right now, we are seeing this trend or movement in the world. The content of the data is something that we need to think about. So ontology dictionary, and ontology dictionary is the minimum unit, and we have to consider the meaning of it. And as an extension of it, there is a data quality, and then it goes and link to the digital economic block. So what needs to be done in Japan is to think about the real nature of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your detailed explanation. Digital economy, which is a major paradigm shift, try to understand what is taking place around data. So when it comes to digital economy, Industry 4.0, GAIA-X, many initiatives started in Europe. So I'd like to ask Mr. Tardieu, in your presentation, you talk about Skywise and Catena-X, some of the efforts taking place in Europe. In some of these examples, what are the success factors? What made them successful? In the book that you introduced, that I have here, you talked about digital economy and data exchange. The economics that serve as the basis for the data exchange was explained in your book. And you also referred to that in your presentation. Once again, going back to those examples, what are the key success factors? In order for us to understand them, what will be the key points for us to be able to achieve data exchange? So could you explain to us what are the success factors of those initiatives?
Okay, so let us take basically two examples. If we go back to the case of Skywise, 130 airline company and Airbus. What is important to realize is that because of competition, the industry has now been segmenting the value chain in small slices. And in each of the slices, the competition was so tense that no one was willing to share data with the other part of the value chain. So if you look at the value chain in airline transportation, one company, Airbus, is building the aircraft. Another company, Japan Airlines, is operating the aircraft and is satisfying customers. If the two never exchange data, they are losing a lot of the value which can be created altogether. Okay, that is really the basis of the reasoning of data economics. This is linked, as I mentioned, to the fact that many of the transactions are not reflecting what is called externalities, which are either, as it was mentioned by our colleague in NTT, in terms of waste and in terms of pollution, so this is negative externalities, or it can be positive externalities if we are able to share data which can be useful to both of the partners. So in the case of Skywise, typically, as I mentioned, if Japan Airlines is having an Airbus which is having a failure, it is very important that Japan Airlines has access to the data, production data of aircraft which have been built at the same time and in the same batch as the one they have bought, to see whether they have had a similar failure, and if they have had a similar failure, to apply the repair as soon as possible. This is the same thing in Catena-X. What is really important to know is that today there is no common data space for the automotive manufacturer, typically BMW, and for the part manufacturer, typically Bosch. So if there is a failure in the car, most of the time that would be due to a specific part, but because each of them is keeping their data, as we say, near their chest, they are unable to exchange properly the reason of the failure and the way to correct the failure, which is making the repair much longer. Okay, so in a nutshell, data sharing is the very basic way for industry to improve performance in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. So the externality of the data, we should be able to control that feature of data. That's going to be an important theme. Thank you for your answer. So controlling that data externality, I think what becomes important is the next theme. This one here. Data quality. I think it's going to be quite important. So next up, I want us to discuss data quality. So concerning data quality, I understand there is discussion taking place across the world. In Japan, we now have digital agency, which just started, which is a major event this year. So I'd like to invite Mr. Hiramoto, representing digital agency. There is a major trend of focusing on digitalization. What type of strategy Japanese government has to promote this data strategy, and how do you position data quality in the Japanese government data strategy? Please unmute Mr. Yamato. Thank you. Yes, I'd like to share my slides. Thank you. I said earlier, as of September 1st, digital agencies started. Digitalization efforts took place in separate ministries before digital agency was established. This was led by Prime Minister. We have also Minister of Digital Agency. Under this agency, there are service groups and technology groups, as you can see the third layer from the bottom. Government to business, government to consumer. There are multiple teams working. We provide systems, local government systems. All of these systems will be looked at so that we can introduce governance and improve services. In the technology group, we have data team. This is a horizontal team. To make sure that data is utilized effectively, try to improve the data value, also assure data quality. So again, this is a cross-functional data team. We have about 600 staffs, of which 200 are engineers and technicians from the private sector. And we have data team comprised of 20 people. If you could go to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide, the second slide? That shows the overview of the data strategy. Professor Koshizuka said this is too difficult to translate. So what I did is to give you all the technology parts. So June 18th, we came up with this national data strategy. We have assets in the architecture up to strategy on top. So architecture is now considered in layers. In each part of the architecture will be specific area that we work on. And we have DFFT up to trust on the left-hand side. In order for us to exchange data, trust is necessary. You should be able to assure authenticity of data and trustworthiness of transmission itself. So trust plays an important role. And at the bottom, Professor Koshizuka talked about base registry. It's a basic data shared globally. Data standardization and social basic data will be created. And of course, data quality must be assured. For people to be able to use government data, we have to make sure the data is latest and in high quality. By assuring data quality, we'll be able to strengthen trust that I explained earlier on the left-hand side. So from the beginning, we have to be aware of the importance of data quality. As Professor Koshizuka said, we also look at this data EX platform. You can mash up or cleanse data, and we have to make sure that should not sacrifice data quality. And on the right-hand side, we have data exchange market. This will be established eventually. High quality data should be traded at high price. Low quality data, maybe you don't need to have high quality data. Data quality is going to be an important indicator to facilitate such trade. And there are many other pieces. AI, data analysis, ID, all of these are important areas. But today we focus on trust, data EX, which is the tool for data exchange, and basic data, cleansing data. And if you could move on to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, data free flow with trust, DFFT. Of course, quality is an important part of this. And as you can see in the second statement, we are providing data version of data quality management framework that is now being verified based on ISO 25000 and 8000. These are all international standards. We came up with a checklist to assure high quality. During the use of data, quality assurance should not avoid people from using data. So we need to make sure good level of quality. And manufacturers would find data quality important factor. So we do have a small subcommittee to make sure how we can maintain and assure data quality. Government have text data and manufacturers have sensor data. All of these will be the base data. Government must be a model to make sure every data that government offers is of high quality. So we work on data quality. So this is part of our strategy. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Hiramoto-san explained the direction of the digital agency. Now, data EX, or Hiramoto-san touched upon this. For the manufacturers, there are a lot of subsidiaries and a lot of companies. So cross-domain data exchange is important. So I'd like to ask Dr. Koshizuka the following question. The cross-domain data exchange platform, as that data EX is being developed. So what are the important aspects of the data quality that you focus upon? And are there any hot topics? Could you introduce that to us? Yes, thank you. Well, data quality is extremely important. Usually when we say data quality, is, for example, the good format or technically good, but the technical aspect of the data, there are various aspects. For example, authenticity and the trust and security, including the system. There is also a security. So there is a diversified aspects. Also, when you consider cross-domain, for each domain, the concept of the quality could differ. So, for example, what is important is that for us, who are in charge of the infrastructure, the important thing is to manage the quality, not to improve the quality. Of course, that data have a high quality, but some data has a poor quality, but there could be some huge amount of it. So, for example, the social network data is one of the good examples. So, to be able to manage data quality is more important. So, metadata was also mentioned as a keyword. So, to have a metadata for data and the history of data and authenticity of data, the lineage of data, and to distribute the data, or when you consider the data exchange market, those become very important. That's the first point. The second is that the quality of the data itself is important, but also each industry is looking for the quality of the actions dealing with data. So players' quality, so users and the creators, whether they are whether they can be trusted, and also the transaction of the data, whether you can have a high quality transaction or trading of data. And by doing so, trust, justice, accountability, when you try to exchange data, whether we can do it at high quality, I think those become important. So until now, we did not have that, for example, for the internet. So transaction, players, trustworthiness, and lineage and so forth, we have to improve all of those aspects. For the international cooperation, how to assure or guarantee that quality. If you have a different methods in EU and Japan, that would not work well. So we have to work closely with EU, especially in the area of trust. EU's mechanism and Japan's mechanism, I think that the trusted link is different. So we have to collaborate. And in Japan, for different sectors and industry, there is a different rule of the quality. So I think that that needs to be federated. So we want to unify those rules. And of course, there are some areas that we can not unify, but those are the things that we need to work on. Thank you. So data quality management. Surrounding that, for example, you mentioned trust and other factors. So I'd like to ask Mr. Tardieu. So GAIA-X is a major platform. And in GAIA-X, about the data quality management, is there a kind of a criteria? Or in Europe, is there a quality management? In order to promote the quality management, what are the challenges or the issues that are understood, or some requirements that exist in the area of the data quality? Mr. Tardieu.
So thank you for the question. So I would like to say that I completely agree with what Mr. Koshizuka has said. Data quality has to be sorted out data space by data space, because what agriculture needs is not like what manufacturing needs. And in our view, this is a consensus within the ecosystem that every data which is not used by the same company which has collected them need to have a common understanding through an ontology or through a mechanism which has to be used. Now, in the way we see it in Europe, the most difficult challenge of industry today is to be sure that the quality is there, but the usage of the data which is shared is properly controlled in real time, okay? So in other words, if there is any risk that the data is misused, industry prefer not to share. Now, because you asked me the question about Europe, let me tell you that in Europe, and especially in a platform like Skywise, the most challenging thing is that the intermediary, the company which is operating the platform, has to take the responsibility to improve the quality while it is not necessarily paid to do that. And as part of the new regulation, which I have mentioned briefly in the Data Governance Act, it is now requested in Europe that the data intermediary, the company which is putting together the data of all the members of the ecosystem, cannot be a member of the ecosystem, which means that if you take Airbus, they have spent huge money to harmonize the data coming from all of the companies participating to Skywise, and they are requested not to be the company to operate, therefore not to reap the benefit of improving the data quality. So I would say, I can come back if you wish, why data intermediary cannot be part of the ecosystem as providing data, but I can tell you this question of data quality is of utmost importance, and we need to find a reasonable economical ground who has interest to improve the quality and what is the cost of improving the quality when it is a shared task with some regulation into it. So absolute essential problem.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Okay, then let us move on to the next topic. Next topic is the main topic of today. That is the data exchange and data quality for the manufacturers and challenges and issues. So first, I'd like to ask Mr. Sonoda, as one of the manufacturers. The Japanese manufacturers' data distribution to activated, what are the challenges or issues? Could you tell us your views? And also in Japan, you are the head of the engineering association, so I'm sure that you are having the deep discussion about the data quality. So if you can share with us some of the things that are being discussed about some of the latest examples. Thank you. Well, first of all, from the manufacturer's perspective, let me talk about the data quality. Frankly speaking, and we have not yet caught up with the international level of understanding. I think we are in the process of catching up. Until now, we went through the high economic growth stage, and at that one time, we were called Japan as #1. So about the manufacturing, we strengthened our ability, and now the manufacturing is cross-border. Different countries and different organizations exchange finished goods as well as a work in progress. So the receivers of those products have the inspection on the quality. And data which comes from the products, do they check? But that is not usually the case. So when we have a digital economies, of course, the goods will go beyond the borders. And when data also is being distributed, we need to really look at the data quality. And I already mentioned some of the conditions, ontology. We have to understand it clearly, and we have to be able to operate it. So that is one of the areas that we are a bit behind. So it's still difficult. And next topic is the data quality and standard of it. As it was introduced, the Association of the Engineering, we have an international standards group, and ISO 8000 industry data quality. That is the discussion that is being done at the TC 184. There are several experts from that group, including myself. So we have that discussion. And this week and next week, we have a Q4 working session. So almost every day we have meetings. And the basics of the data quality is that it has to be simple and it has to be fit for purpose. So whether it's fit for purpose, that is the most important criteria. But as Dr. Koshizuka mentioned, in the various manufacturing sectors and depending on different phase, the way of thinking of the data quality is quite different. So depend on the status and also the context. So in our case, we have more than 700 products, and at least there are 700 different contexts. So ISO 8000 series, when we develop them, data quality, the term, the standard with the data quality, and we have done some research on that. And as of now, there are 53 ISO standards. And in those standards, data quality, there are 64 data quality related. There are actually more than that. So at least 64. The accuracy, completeness, those are included. And even in ISO, about accuracy definitions, there are big differences of definition. So looking at the accuracy or completeness, it is not possible to have those as a clear factors. So, for example, in the product life cycle, the products will go through from one person to another, and data is being exchanged, and the data quality criteria changes as the products may be around. So we have to be able to focus on the overall data quality. We have a higher level standard for that. And so ISO 8000 and Part 8 is exactly that. So ISO 2501, the software data quality also exists, but this is the data quality in the context of the software. So probably there are various axes, at least 64, and ISO 8008 stipulates the higher level of data quality. By creating a matrix of those, maybe we can organize the whole picture. That is my view. And something like that is what we need to do. So in Europe, there is a GAIA-X, and in Japan, we have DSA and Data-EX. So in the future, internationally agreed rule based on the international standard, the data quality at the meta level, the way of thinking like that needs to be introduced. So the different context and the differences can be differentiated and compared, and that's something that I expect. And lastly, I'm not sure who said this, but oil is the key for the security, and the data is the key for the data security. So in order to make the data as strategic resources, ontology dictionary, each country or each region need to manage, and the platform for the data exchange, the federation, was mentioned. So ontology dictionary also needs to be federated. So that kind of a mechanism or system also becomes necessary. And lastly, at the Association of Engineering, in order for this type of knowledge to be understood, the latest example of the DX seminar is being held, and Japanese METI and also RRI. We are exchanging information about the data quality, so we can think about what needs to be done in Japan and also vis-a-vis the international community. So that's what we have been discussing. Thank you.
Thank you for giving us the latest information. It was very useful. So data exchange between manufacturers or the data quality issues. Viewers have posed some questions in this area, so let me introduce some of the questions we received. To Mr. Tardieu, there is a question here. So Skywise example and GAIA-X, you introduce these examples. So the question is as follows. Efforts on EU data space, and on the other hand, platforms, GAFA in the United States, they have the centralized model in the United States. What are the differences? Skywise, for example, there is Airbus, that is a major central player. Is it possible this is going to be the next GAFA? So, Mr. Tardieu, would you like to answer this question? Please unmute yourself.
By asking this question, you are the question is raising the role of the GAFA in creating data spaces. I guess there is something we share in Japan, between Japan and Europe, is that we are convinced that the manufacturing data should be organized between companies doing manufacturing, and that we do not need the GAFA to organize data spaces in manufacturing and else. So having said that, it is true that Airbus is willing to extend further Skywise, but I would not suggest that the intention of Airbus by any means is to become a GAFA, because what they want is to reduce the cost of operating planes, while in the case of GAFA, what they want is to sell more of their cloud services. These are two different aspects. We believe there is a nice role for GAFA in improving cloud services by accepting to respect the constraints of portability and interoperability, as well all the elements for reducing their cost. But honestly, we do not see them playing an important role in building the data spaces. I know this is very different in the US, when we see that typically Microsoft and Google have offered to help the US government to establish a data space in else. This is something which is completely impossible in Europe, and I do not know, but I suspect you have the same attitude. Let's else company organize the data space for else and do not use a GAFA to do so.
ありがとうございます。GAFA との大きな違いというのは非常にプリンシパルレベルというかフィロソフィーレベルが違うということが非常によく理解できました。で、引き続きですね、ヒューベルト様にご質問させていただきつつ、次の最後のセッションに移ってまいりたいと思うんですけれども、今、日本は比較的ヨーロッパと似たポジションじゃないかというようなご指摘をいただいたかと思うんですけれども、そのデータ連携という文脈の中で、ヨーロッパと日本のハーモナイズというかコラボレーションというかをこれからどんどん進めていく上でですね、何が重要になってくるというふうにお考えでしょうか。引き続き教えていただければと思います。よろしくお願いします。
Mr. Tardieu, question for you.
Yes, what is the question?
What will become important as we try to harmonize? So as you point that out, we have similar positions between Japan and Europe. So as we try to link data, what do we need? What are important things for us to be able to harmonize between these two regions in the country?
Okay, so I believe the presentation of Professor Koshizuka was absolutely in line with what we think in GAIA-X. For me, the next step is to see whether we want between Japan and Europe to cooperate on the building of data spaces. Do we want to cooperate in the building of ontology for manufacturing? Do we want to cooperate on ontology for health, for finance, for energy? We have not yet started the real discussion on that, but I do not see any reason, since anyway, the Japanese industry and the European industry are cooperating in very many industrial domains, why we could not have a common ontology between Europe and Japan. For me, this is the very important dimension. Separately from that, there is a discussion about, do we agree of what we are expecting in terms of interoperability, portability, sovereignty from the cloud service providers? And I believe as well, I would be happy we engage discussion with Professor Koshizuka and DataX to see whether we have the same definition of what we call the policy rules, which are policies which have to be defined between users and providers, and which have to be accepted by the cloud service provider to be implemented ex ante in their offering. And as you know, all the GAFA, so Amazon, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and Google are part of GAIA-X. They know that if they want to increase their market share in Europe, they need to follow the policies defined by the European users. And so they are completely behind what I am telling you, that they want to contribute to practical and feasible policy rules, and they are ready to put them in their offering as soon as they are completely defined. I do not see why we should not undertake that effort in common between Japan and Europe, because at the end, many of the cloud service providers you use in Japan are the same as the one we use in Europe.
ありがとうございます。次にですね。
Thank you very much. Now we would like to ask Mr. Sakaino to explain some of the specific challenges. In your presentation, you talked about NTT Group's experiment, the mutual connection demonstration with GAIA-X. Have you found any specific challenges out of that demonstration? Possibly the important key areas for EU-Japan collaboration. This may be abstract. I try to understand the lifestyles 20 years from today. In other words, we have to have social optimization. Business and system standardization need to take place in the IT areas in 1990s and onward. What happened in IT is going to happen in the manufacturing. Standardization, commoditization, software, network. All of these things I think GAIA-X want to introduce into the manufacturing. We used to have mainframe, huge computers. There was no interoperability between manufacturers. In 1990s, we had PCs, but operating systems were all different. No interoperability was offered. We had word processor produced in Japan. But at workplace, data was exchanged in paper. And we had PC communication. Again, interoperability was missing. Accuracy and trustworthy of data was missing. There is no way that we could use data. Manufacturers, including small and medium-sized companies, still live in the old age. They are not able to use data fully. It's not just manufacturers, construction companies, retailers, all of them have problems. For example, they have building information modeling in the construction industry. Japan is lagging behind in terms of standardization. But in the future, we should be able to deal with digital data, share that globally. We have to have a system to make that possible. There are a lot of things that we can learn from GAIA-X. Industrial network, OPC, UA is one example. Industry 4.1, administration shell is another example. IDS, which is going to be used for GAIA-X, is going to be a standard. So then the specification should be eliminated. And there will be computers connected via communication network. There will be digital computing in the manufacturing industry. So retailers, compared to retailers, manufacturers are lagging behind because the equipment has long life. It takes a long time until they are able to replace with a new system. There will be digital startups in this area. So what we want to do is to focus on that. We have to learn from GAIA-X and try to copy what is good. 100 years ago, there was a major turning point, and Japan was able to westernize, modernize Japan, learning from outside the country. We can do that again.
Thank you very much. Now, you talked about the history of computers and also the strength of Japan based on the history. Thank you very much for giving us a kind of a big picture. Lastly, Dr. Koshizuka, the end of the start of the Meiji era was also mentioned, how we became the developed nation learning from outside of Japan. So as a big picture, now what would be the ideal of Japan, Europe collaboration in the area of the data exchange? Thank you very much. As Dr. Tardieu, Mr. Tardieu mentioned, working with Japan is important, and I appreciate his remarks. And between EU and Japan, technology and the policy and rules, in both of those areas, harmonization will be extremely important between Japan and EU. Until now, it was just a word of the internet, but the connectivity of the technologies was one of the most important requirements. But now we have to think about the policy, rules, and trust, and also quality that we talked about. It's very important to harmonize all of them. Well, when we say harmonization, international standardization, ITU, use this term. So harmonization, I think, is important. And toward that, specifically, there are three things that we need to do. One, I think because of the pandemic, I think we are being kind of isolated, but regardless, I think coordinating between Japan and EU is important at the government level. And of course, Mr. Hiramoto is here, so digital agency should lead. And as an industry, DSA, us, and also RRI and GAIA-X, we can work at the industry level, and NTT also does that. So coordinating all this is important. And also between Japan and EU, we need to share values. And human exchange, the exchange of people is important. Before creating the data network, I think we need to build a human network. So in that sense, coordination becomes important. That's the first point. The second, is to, in order for us to understand each other, this type of conference is important. And about those technical issues, for the mutual understanding, I think experiments are also important. Demonstrations. NTT is introduce their experiments, and we also have with IDSA and GAIA-X, we will be promoting experiments. So by doing so, mutually, we can exchange technologies and deepen our understanding about all of those. And the third is that it's not just Japan and EU which need to collaborate. Of course, we need to share values, and we need to apply it to the world. So Japan, EU, for example, GAIA-X and Data-EX, if we are able to cooperate, that know-how and the values as an international standards, we need to apply it to other countries so that we can have a common goal. So it's not just a data space between Japan and EU, but a data space, trusted data space in the world. And for that, we need to develop the framework so that we can create such overall common platform. Right, so at the higher level or dimension, we would like to be able to provide such values to the world, working together with the EU. There are other points that we'd like to discuss, but our time is almost up. So this is the end of the panel discussion. And lastly, about tomorrow's session, I'd like to briefly introduce that. Tomorrow is day 4. So we will start at the same time, 5 p.m. in Japan. We have a Japan-Germany expert forum. So I hope you will join us tomorrow. This time it was a remote, a virtual event, but we had the distinguished speakers making presentations and also joining us at the panel discussion. And at the end, please give a big round of applause to all the speakers and panelists. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to end day 3 of the symposium. Once again, thank you very much to all the panelists.